Hi everyone, I'm Yiqing and I am presenting a conference talk on my research project, which has to do with various ecosystems in Singapore. I'm joining from Singapore, obviously, where I've lived since 2011. I've been a Polygence scholar since 2023, and my work with Polygence has been under Lupita's mentorship. So why did I choose this research topic? Singapore is known as a city in nature and contains 24 designated nature areas as well as many other parks. I've always appreciated that, but in recent years, I've found myself wondering how we got to this point. As you can see in the map, modern Singapore is dominated by young secondary forest, and the tiny fragments of primary forest remaining are restricted to a few spots in central Singapore. Southeast Asia is incredibly biodiverse, and Singapore is no exception to that. Even on the small main island, there are many different ecosystems, each of which are unique in terms of species. There was so much more I wanted to learn about these ecosystems, how they compare with one another, and especially how human activity has impacted them. This intellectual curiosity to explore these places at a deeper level and think about what it means to have these green spaces, what species are present, and how organisms interact with one another motivated me to pursue this research topic. So what did I do? First, I collected field data. These were the 3 ecosystems I researched, all of which are unique in their type and location. Field site A is a secondary coastal hill forest, which has been left to grow naturally after being a World War II bunker, and is on the central south end of the island. Field site B contains the largest remaining portion of primary forest left on the main island, along with old secondary forest, and is in central Singapore. Field site C consists of mangroves and wetlands and is situated in the northwest, and it's actually been recognized as a biodiversity heritage site and hosts many migrant bird species from November to February, as well as resident birds. I surveyed these ecosystems for plant and bird species and trash pollution using methods I'll talk about on the next slide, and on this slide you can see the locations of my field sites on the island of Singapore. Throughout my surveying, I practiced keen observation by noting down anything in particular I noticed about my field sites, where I could see human activity, etc., in my field notebook, which you can see in the lower right of this slide. I surveyed each field location 4 times, once for plants, thrice for birds, reason being that birds could change over time as they move and plants would not. And only field site C had the added data points of trash pollution, as I didn't see any at the other 2 sites. At each field site, I had 1 or 2 transects, where I measured out 50 meters using a transect tape measure and would survey alternating 5-meter segments along the transects, also known as field locations. For each field site, there were coded A, B, and C, and field locations were A1, A2, B1, B2, and C, and I had a decimal point for each time that I surveyed them. And I also used binoculars for any visual information. And you can see these videos, which show what I did. So this one is me basically measuring out my transect. And this is an example of how I would do a plant survey, but it's pretty much the same for an audio bird survey where I just walk along the transect, taking note of where I am, and afterwards I can analyze the data from that. And this is what a visual bird survey would look like, where I kind of take 2 hours to walk around the entire place, and then I would take pictures and videos of any bird that I saw. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. My speaker notes just did a funny thing. Okay, we're back. So these are the different types of data that I collected. I had an initial standardized method for plants, birds, and trash pollution that I wanted to use for all my field sites. However, I had to adjust them according to the different conditions and challenges that I met. This included changing bird data for sites A and B to audio, as I couldn't see any birds, but I could hear them. And I also used visual bird data and not a transect method for site C, as most birds present could be observed visually, and transects would be inappropriate considering the birds were in the center of an oval footpath. For birds and trash pollution surveys at Site C, I used Google Earth to map out distances along the migratory bird trail. And here you can see how I did that. So I had segments and also a total distance. So data processing involved firstly taking down raw data, And then I used functions in Google Sheets to make measurements of species diversity or abundance to compare between the locations, which led to process tables and graphs. I also wanted to investigate whether particular segments along the transects deviated greatly from the average in terms of species diversity, so I calculated standard deviation as well. So here you can see some examples of raw data, which is basically the numbers that I got from my videos. And here are the process tables, which lead to graphs. So for birds, my figures suggested that field site A was overall more species diverse in terms of birds than field site B on the days where I surveyed them, and that field site B was overall the most species diverse for plants, followed by field sites A and C. As seen in the earlier slides, I found both migrant and resident birds, such as the whimbrel and little egret, as well as defining tree species of my ecosystems, such as wild cinnamon, large-leaved mangrove, and silverback. These are really significant, as existing literature cites them as native, and some are also quite rare. I was really pleased to see zero trash pollution at sites A and B, which may be because A is only visited by local residents and is elevated, and B is inland, mainly used by locals who adhere very well to the signage on trash disposal. However, Site C, being near the Malaysian border and surrounded by factories and aquaculture, is vulnerable to pollution, and I saw this on all my surveys there. You can see some examples of it on this slide, and I was particularly struck by how currents and tides carried trash into the mangroves, and I even saw a group of crows building a nest with styrofoam packaging, which is impressive, but also really sad. So what are my conclusions? What have I found? There are some considerations during my research process, such as the fact that I surveyed all the ecosystems in a 3-week span during my holidays so I could put my maximum effort into them. I also chose this time specifically in order to catch the peak of migratory birds in Singapore, as December and January are when they're most abundant and researchable. Singapore as a tropical country and along the equator doesn't change much in terms of climate throughout the year, so I think my results would still be relevant to other seasons. I used different methods in field site C, which may have reduced the comparability of my findings to sites A and B. However, I stand behind that decision as it gave me insights into alternate research techniques, which was a great learning experience. And considering how important field site C is to Singapore's biodiversity, and not just Singapore, but Southeast Asia as a whole, I wouldn't want to give it up as a field site. Throughout my research, I've quantified species diversity and abundance at the various ecosystems I've visited, and numerically, my field sites and field locations are definitely biodiverse. When I compare it to existing peer-reviewed research that's out there, my conclusions are similar, and that the ecosystems are all incredibly unique, whether in terms of species or trash pollution. I found very little species overlap between the field sites and locations, which just goes to show how amazingly different they are from each other. It's really exciting to see that even a small island can have such specialized regions. There's little doubt that all these ecosystems are important. When I walk outside now, I'm not only appreciating the importance of nature and us being a component of ecology, but also looking analytically at what impact we've had on nature and understanding these organisms at a deeper level. Overall, I think it's incredible that Singapore has still managed to conserve its many ecosystems despite being very urbanized. And I'm impressed with how we've intervened, such as information science promoting species education and how we should leave no trace by throwing away trash at designated bins. Of course, being a small island does mean that we can have nature reserves really close to polluting infrastructure, which can greatly impact them. And in the future, I really want to give suggestions to organizations on how to preserve and raise awareness about them, as well as encourage and assist industries near nature in dealing with waste. I'd also love to visit my field sites again, maybe in a different time of year, to see how they change and evolve. I'd like to thank my parents for encouraging me to engage with research here, and most importantly, my amazing mentor and the Polygence team for giving me guidance, resources, and a lot of good laughs. I'm really excited to see how this research project turns out, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for sharing the results of your research. This is fascinating. A bunch of questions I want to get to. I'll try to go through them as quickly as possible. First, from the audience, did you expect to get a result where plant diversity and bird diversity would not be the highest in the same sites? And why do you think that might be?
I think actually I expected all of the diversities to be the highest in field site B because that's primary forest and theoretically that should be the most productive ecosystem that's still left here. And I was surprised to see that there's actually higher bird diversity in field site A, even though it's been regrowing only since World War II, so it's quite young. But I do know that species diversity is only one measurement in how productive an ecosystem is. And maybe there would have been more species that I saw at field site A, but they might not be as rare or as important. For example, like I did see a lot of pigeons and doves, but those aren't necessarily as integral to ecology compared to the, albeit fewer, but more important and significant species I saw in my other sites.
That's great. Two last questions. One, what could Singapore be doing differently to conserve its outdoor spaces? And maybe if we wanted to focus it even further, thinking about Site C that you mentioned, is there something else that Singapore could be doing differently?
I think Singapore has already done really well in trying their best to both grow economically, because it is important to grow economically, but also try and preserve a lot of the ecosystems we have here since they're all so unique. But I do think that particularly in regards to Field Site C, a lot of it has to do with the industry and the aquaculture that is nearby. So I would really love it if governments and organizations could kind of encourage these businesses or provide assistance to them so they know how to deal with their waste properly and make sure that it isn't like swept up in the currents and then gets transported to the mangroves, which would make the situation a lot worse. Yeah.
Perfect. And then last question from the audience, kind of a fun one. What is your favorite native bird in Singapore?
Oh, I really like the white-bellied sea eagle. I think they're a very resilient bird. You tend to see them not only in the really green nature reserves, but also like in the office building outside my room. And I think they're just a testament to how nature can adapt. And yeah, and they also look very cool.
Very cool. Well, thank you again for sharing your research. This has been fascinating. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.